Hello.
Hola. What's happening?
Not much. I heard our 14-year-old get home, and she was supposed to have a track meet tonight. So then I'm like, I think it got canceled because it's been raining for the last 4 days straight. But on the plus side, we don't have to go to a track meet tonight. So
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
You can hear me, but I
Yes. Can't hear us.
you. Okay. Let me figure out what's wrong with that. Ah, there we go. All set. You can still hear me, right?
What?
Yep.
Oh, good.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Yay.
Gotta get on my headphones.
Heather, it's so fun to see you again.
Good to see you guys too. How's everybody doing? Okay.
I can't feel my legs, but other than that.
I saw your
Why can't you feel your
box
legs?
jump earlier.
He's
That
just, you know how CrossFitters always talk about their CrossFitting? That's what he's doing right there.
I see.
But I really can't feel my legs. It was bad. The box jumps were warm-ups.
Oh.
Yeah.
Nice. My brother does CrossFit. He exercises all the time. And then he and his wife just decided to adopt a sibling group. There's 2 of them. There's a 2-year-old and a 9-year-old. And so they've been talking about it for a while, but they get him they get him soon. I'm not sure. I don't think they've been placed yet. But I told Mac, I go, well, there goes all his 24-hour-a-day exercising, because you definitely aren't going to be able to do that anymore with a 9-year-old and a 2-year-old.
Yep.
That changes everything.
All right. So we don't have show notes, right? I didn't do any.
I didn't
got
do
your
it
own.
either. I'm in finals week, so I've been writing papers. It's insane. It's just insane. The number of things I'll do at once. Kind of horrifying.
I've just been shop vacuuming.
I mean, if I had planned ahead and like paced it out and done things before they were due.
Who does that?
Yeah, no, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, we're only 2 weeks past Easter, so it's not like that was super realistic.
Right.
Yeah.
What?
Man, I had a huge exegesis due the Thursday of Holy Week. That's who does that at a seminary? Is that
Where are
insane
you going
or
to
what?
school at, Tara?
NTS. I'm wrapping up my degree that I started at Trevecca. I'm finishing it at NTS.
Okay.
And Roger Hahn had it wasn't that bad, but a 10-page exegesis on Deuteronomy due on the Thursday of Holy Week. I think that's just, no, not fair. Anyway, I'm cross-eyed and about dead, but I'm almost done.
The perfect time to talk about people who annoy us in our churches.
Brad is teaching for NTS in the fall.
Is he really?
Cool.
Oh, how fun! Seriously?
He's teaching a church history class of some sort.
Oh,
North
I think
American
I've already
church
filled
history.
all my church history requirements. Oh, that's too bad. That would have been so cool to take a class from him.
Yes, he's excited about it.
That's really exciting. So is that a possibility of becoming maybe more of a full-time thing, or?
Not now that we're not Nazarene.
Yeah.
That would, I forget the name of the guy who's the dean now. What's his name? Josh Sweden.
Yeah, that's right.
Basically telegraphed to him that he would not be the top candidate for the history job because he's not an Americanist, and the faculty really want an Americanist, and he's a white guy. And the GSs would ask him directly about the LGBT issues, and if he didn't lie, they wouldn't hire him. There's several districts now. I don't know if they're on your districts, but there's several districts now that I've heard of that are like denying people licenses on LGBT issues.
Wow.
Doesn't surprise me.
No kidding. And I know it's not happening on our district, but man.
I would be really surprised if it happened on ours.
Yeah, I know they are in KC. I know they are here. So
we all know they are on Brian Powell's district.
That's right. So I don't know what will happen.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah.
I don't know. I just remember when someone left the denomination over LGBTQ issues, and Dave was trying to get her to come on our district. So he was asking me about her, and I said, like, this is why she was leaving and blah blah blah. And he said to me, we were on a mission trip to Greece, and he said to me, I wish she wouldn't leave the church for that, just because we disagree. It makes us better if we can have these conversations. So
Bartley.
if
Man,
people
that
aren't
guy.
if people aren't getting licensed, it's not because of him. Because he thinks it's important to have the conversation, even if everybody doesn't agree on it. He's like, there has to be room for us to grow.
Yeah.
But that's, I mean, guys like Andy and Brian Powell, like they
and
disagree.
Andy's on our district, which is amazing. But
and on the Mid-South district, or whatever this district is called, they've been talking about how, like, they've been asking that question, like, do you have to toe the line, or is there space to not, and they're falling on the you have to toe the line, like, so it's kind of crazy.
I flat out told some of my ordinand candidates to lie about that issue, get ordained, and then change it.
Nobody asks you about it after you get ordained.
Well, you're ordained, right? So.
Well, my issue is that you care so much about those issues, but nobody asked me once in the whole process if I was a Christian. Never. Ever. Like, shouldn't that be a bigger concern, that we're ordaining people who aren't Christians? Like, I don't know.
People
nobody asked me if I had
beds with teenage girls.
They never asked me if I had been baptized. They didn't ask me if I was a Christian. All they asked me about was sanctification. I actually had really good ordination interviews. I had some rough district licensing things, but drinking came up a few times.
Of course.
But yeah.
Yes.
What district were you ordained on, Robbie?
Chicago Central.
Oh, okay.
But my first district licenses were through Michigan District.
Oh, okay.
So what are we going to talk about, guys?
Well, I was thinking if we wanted to try to do both, maybe the best way to do it would be to do like an abbreviated things we wish that our congregations knew as like an opener, and then move into the parenting thing. If we wanted to focus on one or the other, I think they're both big enough topics that we could fill a whole show with either one of them.
Well, didn't we do parenting with
we did with Sarah Riley.
Oh, okay.
So
well, I knew we had done something with parenting. This felt like it was a little different.
No, that's what I'm saying though, right? But like, I think it's okay if we do like half a show on it, because we did not terribly long ago.
Yeah.
I know that's not all she talked about, but it was a good part of what she talked about.
Yeah.
Maybe we should label this when whatever amount we talk about it, rather than calling it parenting, we need to talk about it like a theology of children's ministry or something like that. What does it look like to do children's ministry well, Christian education well among children in our churches?
This might be an interesting place to bring in that WAPO article about the synagogue shooter.
I haven't had a chance to read it just yet.
It's not very long.
I mean, it's just basically this kid like was a confessing Christian and
still says he is.
Yeah. And yet obviously had no problem murdering people.
Wow.
And so like it's causing his church, like his pastor, a good bit of social anxiety.
Yeah, that would be a good intro to it.
Let me pull that article back up again.
Though speaking of ordination, we had a great ordination service on Monday, and I knew all 4 people, which was awesome. Tanner Griffin got ordained from Winnemac.
Oh, did he?
Which was really awesome. So that was really fun to watch him. And then one of the congregants from there got their first district license too, which was really fun.
Kent Wamsley?
Yeah. Yeah, so that was really fun. And then Melissa Brusa got ordained, which was really awesome. And then Jared Matheson, who got food poisoning the night before and was super sick, and we were all saying a prayer he wouldn't throw up during his ordination. So that was fun. He's at DeMott, where Jeremy Van Clay was. And then who's the 4th one? Jesse Gardner, who took over. I don't know if you guys know Michael Ross at all. Him and Craig Keene share grandchildren. Their kids are married to each other. So there's like some Nazarene connections. But he's an older guy. He like oversees the board of ministerial credential stuff on Northwest Indiana.
So Michael Ross's son would be the one that Heather is married to. Okay.
Yeah, and his successor, Jesse Gardner, got ordained as well. And it was really cool. And Michael prayed for him, and it was really sweet. So,
that's
it was good. It was really good. Dr. Dwart gave a good message. He was really sweet. I really like him.
That's awesome.
So, after having Crocker for 2 years, the bar was set low. So, but Dwart was really nice. He came up and saw Michael and was like, he was just a little baby last year when I was here, and it was really sweet. So
wow, he remembered. That's awesome.
Oh yeah, because I went up to him and said, like, I really appreciate it, because as somebody that's from a culture that's very interracial, that Michael gets to grow up seeing a DS that looks like him. Like, I really valued that. And so he made it a point to come up and talk to us, and he was asking us about our family that's living with us from the Congo, and he was telling me, like, I shared about that in my pastor's report, because we had to share about an act of compassion. So that's what I shared about, and he just was like, your pastor's report was so moving, and he was like, I just really appreciate what you're doing and how you're extending compassion. He was just really nice. So
that's
it was
awesome.
good. Our district assembly was awesome. An 85-year-old lady got up and said that she started going to an LGBTQ support group because she just wanted to, like, learn more and be more compassionate. And everybody was, like, crying and thought it was, like, the coolest thing.
Oh my gosh.
She's like, they asked for my preferred pronouns, and I said, my what? So I went up to her afterwards. I said, did you figure out your preferred pronouns? She goes, this new world is sure confusing, but I'm trying my best to love people. So I was like,
gosh, that's amazing.
In, like, our whole zone, she said that, and everybody was like, a lot of people, like Scott Marshall and a few others, said that was the highlight of my assembly, was her saying she's going to LGBTQ support group just to love people.
Wow.
And learn how to love them. That's great.
Yeah, and she said,
incredible.
I'm learning that I don't need to have the answers, and I don't need to, like, tell everybody what's right and wrong. I just need to love people. And we were like, all right. So there's some good news for you.
That's pretty
in the
neat.
midst of all that other LGBTQ annoying news.
Tara, any news on your front about jobs?
The Bridgeway process is just getting started. May 8th is Jeff's last day. The 5th is his last Sunday, and then he's officially resigned the 8th. So that process won't start until then. After that, the Kokomo Church Board met, and Dave presented our resume along with one other pastor. The other pastors he talked to had dropped out because the church is such a mess. So they didn't like the other guy, but they also could not imagine the co-pastor situation for us. That the whole thing was, well, you can't run a business like that, so how can you run a church like that? So
exactly the same.
Yes, totally a one-to-one comparison. So they took a silent vote afterwards, and of the 15 board members, 9 were against and 6 were in favor. And Dave said that changed the conversation all of a sudden, because the 6 in favor were young. One of them is Brent Smith. Do you remember him from Olivet?
Yes, he's his wife was in my wedding. Like, Lindsay's one of my best friends. Or
oh,
she
no
was.
Kidding.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. So he was on the board. Anyway, Dave said that the 9 that tended to be in the older camp were very surprised to find that there were 6 people who were okay with this. And he said all of a sudden he said he thinks they'll come back when they meet again next week and want to reconsider. But I don't know. I don't know whether that would be a battle worth fighting.
Right.
Especially with Bridgeway on the table. So
yeah.
So I don't know. It's tough. We'll see. We're just kind of in limbo right now.
Brad got 2 job offers this week from Vanderbilt.
Ooh, what?
So he doesn't really want either of the jobs, but he knows that he needs a job. And so I think he is like, I think that he'll be happier about it once he actually takes one of them. He feels like he's worked so long to do this one thing, and that's not happening. And so now he kind of has to let that dream die and then kind of, move into this new place. So that's hard. So I'm trying to be super supportive, and yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that is really hard. Are they both teaching jobs though?
Neither.
Oh man.
One is working in the writing studio, which he did that as a postdoc and really likes it a lot. So you do writing consultations and work with students on their writing and that kind of thing. And then the other one is first year advising for students in the College of Arts and Sciences, which is what he's done this year. But this year he also got to teach, which next year he wouldn't. It would just be advising. So
Yeah.
All right.
So
Well,
wanna
how do we?
this?
Yeah.
We can just start in. I mean, I'm happy to open us with the article from WAPO.
Okay.
I think the
Um,
article kind of connects to both of those things,
Yeah.
like how we disciple people.
Yeah.
what
Yeah,
we
it
would-
definitely
we would
smoothly
know.
goes into the Christian education idea. How do we raise up people in good faith, good theology? Yeah, let's take it from there. We'll see how far we get into it. If we end up talking about that the whole show, that's fine. If we have time to make a shift into things we wish our congregations knew, we'll do it. Does that sound good?
Yep.
Yep. How long are we going to go?
45 minutes. 40
Okay.
minutes.
Sounds good?
All right. Are we still gonna do what we're into?
Does
Does everyone have something to be into?
I do for sure. Yeah, we can do that. I think people like that.
I have a
Can I go last?
Velocipaster update. So
Do you?
Nice.
well, I
You
think I
have a
told
what?
you already, Tara, that I'm gonna have lunch with him on Saturday.
Yes,
the director.
that's
Yeah.
so
So
cool.
That's
Oh
awesome.
my gosh, I think that's really great.
okay.
All right,
Sorry.
who
I'm
wants
just
to go
making
first?
I'm making some basic show notes just so I can remember what everyone's into.
Oh,
Okay.
that's a good idea. Heather, maybe we should have you be the last one so that it can be like the surprise intro of Heather.
Okay. That sounds good.
Okay. All right. So I'll be typing what we're all into.
I've got to come up with something to be into. Can I go last for that part?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
All right, I'll bring us into the show, and then it'll be Heather last. All right, got
Sounds
it.
good.
Here we go.
I'll go second, and then Tara can go third.
Sounds good.
All right, here we go. Welcome back to In All Things Charity, your favorite Wesleyan feminist theology podcast. This is episode number 85. I'm J.R. Forasteros.
I'm Robbie Kanzler.
Wait,
I'm
real
Tara
quick. Sorry. We gotta stop. Robbie, I meant to say this already. We're getting a lot of mic movement noise from you.
Okay, I was trying to move it so there wouldn't be. So let me move it.
It was
now.
happening while we were saying things, and I almost said
Right.
something I forgot. So my bad.
Yeah, I always am adjusting it before we record, but I'm also trying to mute as much as possible. So I will try to move as little as possible.
All right. Here we go. So I'll start this again. Sorry about that. Okay. Welcome back to In All Things Charity, your favorite Wesleyan feminist theology podcast. This is episode number 85. I'm J.R. Forasteros.
I'm Robbie Kanzler.
I'm Tara Thomas Smith.
And I'm Heather Gerbsch-Doherty.
What? Heather's back!
Yay, school's over. That makes all the difference in the world when classes are out and my schedule looks very different. So I'm excited to be here with you guys today.
So we've got a lot to talk about today, but first, especially because Heather's here, we need a what we're into update. So I'm going to go first because I'm cheating a little bit. I have not actually seen this movie yet, but if the rest of you are anything like me, then when the trailer for this movie hit the internet, about 75 different people posted it on your Facebook wall. It is the movie called Velocipaster. And it is allegedly about a priest who has a crisis of faith and it receives either a curse or a blessing. I guess it'll depend on your feelings about what happens, but he is able to transform into a velociraptor. And then, of course, he fights ninjas. So I'm going to go see this. We're recording this on Thursday. Friday night, there's a midnight premiere at Texas Frightmare. So Amanda and I and our friend Radha are going to go see it. And then I somehow managed to finagle a lunch/interview with the director of Velocipaster the next day. Apparently, no one was taking him out for Texas barbecue, and I was able to bribe him with
What?
that. So, yeah. So it might be.
Oh,
I mean,
that's incredible.
it's definitely a terrible movie. Like if you watch the trailers, but it remains to be seen if it's like fun terrible, which is what the director was going for, or if it's just like terrible. So
I think it's important to note that Tara actually considered flying down to watch the movie and have lunch with you, JR.
I'm honestly surprised she didn't pull the trigger on that. I
If
blame
I'd had
school.
any money in my bank account, I would be there right now.
So yeah, Velocipaster. I'm honestly surprised Heather and Robbie didn't consider that.
Well,
When I
don't
think
really like
Velocipaster,
movies. That's why.
I did watch the trailer though.
Oh,
what
it
are your
looks
thoughts on the
glorious.
trailer?
It looked interesting.
Yeah, well,
Like-
I'll bring a
Like
full report.
a fun movie to make fun of,
Right, that's what I'm
Yeah.
hoping. Right, that's like best
Which-
case scenario. So
which is great sometimes to watch.
Yeah.
I mean, they're clearly not going for high art here. Like, there's a genre that this fits into, and the question is whether or not it does well in that genre.
Well, and that's what's been so interesting about the director on Twitter, because of course, Twitter being what it is, a ton of people, when people started sharing this trailer, were like, this movie looks stupid, like what a waste of time, blah, blah, blah. And the director has been very vocal saying like, yeah, guys, duh. Like, I know it's a dumb movie. Like my friends and I were just trying to have fun. And then Entertainment Weekly wrote about it. Like, this was not planned.
Yeah.
So he's really gracious and kind and self-aware. And I'm hoping it's that kind of like fun bad movie. That would just
Yes.
that would be such a treat.
But also, don't you think every pastor at some point wishes they could turn into a dinosaur and eat a congregate?
I'm sure I have no idea what you're talking about, Robbie.
I'm just saying.
I know I have.
That is hilarious.
Oh, well, that sounds fantastic, JR. I'm looking forward to an update and a review.
Well, what are you into, Tara?
I'm into the OA. I've seen it on Netflix. It's been recommended to me a number of times on my Netflix queue. Finally, the second season dropped a couple of months ago, and I watched both seasons just as quickly as I could. Have y'all seen this yet?
I haven't seen the second season yet, but I love it. I loved the first season.
Oh my gosh. It defies
So good.
description, and I'm hesitant to try to tell you what the genre is or what it's about or anything about it, because I feel like it's sort of a process. It's definitely experimental. It's very divisive. I was surprised after I finished watching it. I went to go see the reviews, and I was surprised how many negative reviews were out there. But I guess it makes sense. It's challenging. It's extremely challenging, but it's also positively captivating. I can't stop thinking about it. There are deep theological, psychological, and philosophical issues that could foster endless conversations. It's just fantastic. It's one of my favorite things that I've seen in recent years.
True confession, I got so bored of that I didn't get past episode 4.
Oh my
What?
gosh.
No, you have to keep watching. I feel like you have to keep watching.
I feel like if you haven't gotten into it by episode 4, maybe it's not worth it.
I'm not sure that things fundamentally change. Although the second season is a complete reboot, and there is a twist ending at the end of second season, JR, that I think that you would love so much. But I don't know if it would be worth it for you to slog two seasons you don't like otherwise. But they shift it up each season. So the second season has a totally different, it's a noir feel rather than a fantasy feel. It's kind of interesting the way they reinvent themselves each season.
I have to say, it's not that I didn't like it. It's that I was so complete. It was like I felt nothing. And so I was just bored. I was like, I don't care. I don't care about these characters. I don't care about the mystery. It's not interesting or captivating. I didn't hate it. I just didn't care.
I'm really surprised to hear it. It seems to me that it's a love it or hate it situation for most of the reviews that I've watched. The end of the first season had a very controversial scene that I found strangely moving, and I'm not easy to move. I'm not a particularly emotional person.
Did you cry in Avengers Endgame?
I got teary-eyed. I will give you that. I felt the feels at the cheeseburger line. I felt the feels.
Some of us haven't seen it yet. Come on.
They talk about cheeseburgers. Spoiler.
Spoilers. I don't want to hear about the cheeseburgers.
I was careful in what I said. It should tell you nothing.
Speaking of cheeseburgers, well, only kind of. This week, I am into the Great British Baking Show, Bake Off. I don't know what it's
So
called.
good.
Yes, you guys watch that?
I've never
Yes.
seen it, but I
I'm
keep hearing
super-
about it.
I'm
Yeah,
super
Robbie loves it.
addicted to pretty much any sort of baking show.
Yeah, we have a hard time in our family. So our kids are 5 years apart, 4.5 years apart. And so finding something that we're interested in, that both of them are interested in, and they're a boy and a girl, which may also create some challenges. So we watch series of unfortunate events and like that. And we hadn't found anything that we liked as a family, but we decided we're all foodies. So we decided to watch the Great British Baking Show. And we are on our second season and we all love it.
So I'm curious. I also have never seen any of it. What is it about this particular show, as opposed to like Chopped or Beat Bobby Flay or Nailed It, that works for all of you?
Yeah, I think that because they start out, I think with 12. I can't remember if it's 12 or 13. Do you remember, Robbie, how many people they start out with?
I think it's 12.
Yeah, so
It's been a while since the last season.
So they start out with 12 people. So you get all of their personalities and you follow them like every week. So it's the same people every week. So you get to know them. They all speak with British accents, which is
obviously great. Yeah.
Attractive in itself. And they do really cool kinds of baking things. So I think that those are the things that are interesting. And my kids are really into baking. And so like we watched one over their spring break and I came home and they had baked baguettes because they were so excited about seeing it on the show. So
how were they? Can we get a review of your children's baguettes?
Yes, they were okay. They didn't have quite the crumb that they needed to have. And they tried to do half whole wheat, half white. And they should have just gone with all the white flour and it would have tasted better.
I think on the Great British Bake Off, they don't throw in these weird extra competition things that American things do, where you're like, they don't get immunity, really, like things like that, where you're like, well, that's not really about you win based upon your ability to bake.
Yeah.
Which I think makes a difference.
So I have to say, as someone who is like insanely competitive, I love Cutthroat Kitchen, even though it is the most ridiculous cooking show. And like the worst judge. Have you all seen that show?
I think I've seen 1 or 2 episodes
where you can like they have a thing that's 4 people and then they get it down to 2 and they have to have something that they're all cooking, but then they all start with $25,000 and they bid on sabotages, and then basically you get if you win whatever money you have left over.
But it's like crazy sabotages. Like you can only cook in like a ladle.
Yeah. It really is. It's bananas.
Oh, that sounds great.
Well, it is, but it's like to Robbie's point or to Heather's point, right? Like there's no you walk away with no idea whether the best chef actually won.
Well, right? It sounds to me that that's not the metric they're going for, though.
No, it's not, and so it's fun. My wife can't watch that show. Like she can't handle shows where people are mean to each other, and they clearly recruit people to trash talk and things like that, and to be big personalities. And so they're like, they're gunning for each other and they're like smack talking each other while they're cooking, which I just think is hysterical and great. She can't watch it. So
one of the things I do like about Cutthroat Kitchen, though, is that it introduces you to a lot of chefs from kitchens all over the U.S. that you wouldn't necessarily know their name otherwise.
Yeah.
Which is kind of fun, but I told you I like all the cooking shows, so.
Yes. What are you into, Robbie?
So I'm going to take us a completely different direction. So I actually picked a children's book for Michael, like the anniversary of his baptism. We were trying to figure out a way to commemorate it. And so I decided to pick a book for him. So we bought Matthew Paul Turner's book, When I Pray for You. And it is definitely not written for toddlers, but he loves it. Loves it. Like he loves the art in it. Like we opened a page the first time we read it to him and he went, wow.
Aww.
Like he loves it. It's a really great book about I think he has 3 different books. We only have this one, but it's just a really sweet book about praying over your children and for your children, and how like the prayer is just really sweet and just really like theologically good. Like there's nothing that we really question, but just about all praying through the good times, through the hard times, through the teenage years, through all of these things, and then just praying that they sow light and love in the world and make the world a better place by knowing that God loves them and all of these really great things. So we read it almost every night. So I have it about memorized now, but if you're looking for sometimes I'm always like not sure was kind of a risk with children's books sometimes when you're trying to find like good theology for your kids, and this was a really good choice, like just a simple prayer for your children, and the art is beautiful and really really diverse. So
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, so today we were really wrestling with what exactly to talk about, and we couldn't help but see, obviously, the news about the synagogue shooting that happened last weekend. Last weekend, as we're recording, and this one it stands out in part because the kid who was the shooter is a part of an evangelical church and is like, I don't want to say fanatically evangelical, but like he's like openly talking about how what he's doing to bring glory to God and all this kind of stuff. And he seems entirely unrepentant. And the Washington Post has an article that we'll put in the show notes about how evangelicals are reacting to this, including the pastor of the church that this kid attends. And I'll just read the quote from the article. The pastor said, "It certainly calls for a good amount of soul searching, and because of the reality that he was radicalized in the midst of this congregation." And so I thought it would be worth beginning by talking about what it like. How do you react to the idea that a kid could be, born and raised in a evangelical church and somehow get radicalized into white nationalism to the point that this kid would not only kill people, but then also feel like no remorse and feel as though he's doing it for the glory of God? How did that hit you?
The interesting thing to me, because your first instinct is to say, well, where did he go wrong? What did he misunderstand? What message did he hear that he twisted or warped? The interesting thing about this Washington Post article, and we'll post links to that in the show notes, that it points out that his theology is consistent and cogent with the Reformed theology that he received and grew up under. So it's not so much that he twisted the theology, it's that he took the clearly articulated theology that he was raised in and given and used that then as a basis for his actions. That's the frightening and chilling part for me.
And I would guess that the place where he was raised was not trying to teach him to be this, right? Like that was never the intention of the pastor or the community of faith, but this was the way that he received it and used it. And not to this extent, obviously, but I wonder the ways that happens in our own congregations or in other congregations like this one, the unintended consequences of our theology if they move out to a certain place.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's one thing. You always hear someone say after a sermon you preach, "Oh man, I thought it was great when you said blah, blah, blah." And you're like, I never said that. And so, it's always one thing. You can't take responsibility for what people hear. It's another thing entirely when you say something that then has unintended consequences if someone takes it seriously. What's that mean? That's a whole other level, I think, of culpability and responsibility that we have to examine as pastors. And it certainly gave me a lot to think about.
I contribute to a Facebook page with Nazarene in the title, so you can all speculate about what that is. But we put a quote up this week about racism. And it was frightening to all of us who contribute because the comments were all like, why are we scapegoating white people? White people aren't the problem. Black people are as much culpable in racism as white. I mean, like, and
many fine people on both sides.
Oh, it was like a little bit scary. And one of the other contributors, who's a person of color, said, this just kind of illustrated how much work we still have to do about issues of like racism within our own tradition. But then it's still interesting to me how even because I'd like to say, it's Calvinism, which I think is problematic in a lot of ways. But then I also look within our own tradition and I'm like, how are you in our own tradition? Even some people said, well, I've grown up Nazarene my whole life, and if this is where Nazarenes are going, I want no part of it when we're calling out racism. And that's incredibly concerning to me.
Yeah, I don't know if any of you follow Beth Moore on Twitter. She recently had
Woke
a
Beth
tweet.
Moore is the ultimate form of Beth Moore.
Right? Oh my gosh. So this is her pinned tweet right now. She just posted it a couple of days ago. She says, "There are simply no gospel grounds for defending white supremacy. None. This isn't theological rocket science. The Savior of the world gave himself on the cross for our sins to deliver us from the present evil age, according to the will of our God and Father, wearing a brown body." Now that should not be particularly remarkable or worth like fighting against. You would think, right? You would think that could be a comment that just everybody could accept. And I've been following Beth for a while now, and I don't think that I have seen greater pushback on anything she said than on this. That's concerning.
Yeah. So what I noticed I guess what this article made me think about is not what's present in our preaching, but what's missing from our preaching. Because I think you're right. Especially people who show up like every now and again and only hear things occasionally, like it's hard to say that if they hear something that supports their biases or whatever, that it's the pastor's fault.
Right.
Because we all hear, right? I mean, that's just reality. I think what's more disturbing to me is the idea that we had someone who sat in an evangelical congregation, apparently often enough to consider himself like a faithful Bible quoting kind of a theology spouting kid, and yet he never got the message that God is for everyone and that God is against violence towards anyone, right? And so to me, that's what that illustrates is like a hole in our evangelical theology that lends itself towards rampant individualism. We don't have, and this goes back to what you were talking about with race too, right? Like we don't have a robust theology that God is for the social and the common good. What we focus on in evangelicalism is God died for me, and that's it. Like that's all period, into the story. And I think when that's the sum total of our theology, this is exactly what happens. People get it in their heads that they can do violence towards a particular group of people, and God either doesn't care any particular way about that, or God even champions that.
So, JR, would you say that this is not necessarily something that is problematic in our theology, or maybe I shouldn't say our theology, in that particular strain of theology that he grew up under, but rather there needed to be a supplement, there needed to be something addition, and that having that supplement then would be the corrective?
Well, I don't know that I would call it a supplement. I would say that the evangelical gospel is very anemic.
Yes.
And so I'm trying to think of how to say this, right? Like, I think that if we're going to be talking about like corrective or anything like that, what I would say is, evangelicalism is a product of modernity, which has a strong focus on the individual, and we have to recover I don't want to say social gospel because that has all kinds of. I'm a fan of the social gospel, but it just has so many connotations. A collective gospel.
Yeah.
I think that in like lesser instances, we see this all of the time with an evangelical gospel, that it doesn't matter if I care about social issues. It doesn't matter because I walked the aisle, I went to the altar, I'm saved, I'm going to heaven, and that's the most important thing. So all of those other things are peripheral to what it means to be a Christian, as opposed to central to what it means to be a Christian.
That's exactly it, Heather. And yeah, so I've been talking about race a lot more lately on my social media and just in my circles that I run in, and educating myself about race, because as a white person, I show up to the conversation 400 years later than everyone else. And I have had so many white Christians say the gospel doesn't have anything to do with race, right? Like all we need to do is focus on Jesus, and like things like racism will fix themselves. And it's like, well, A, that's demonstrably not true. Just look at history. B, like that tells me that you and I have a fundamentally different understanding of what the gospel even is. And I think that's, I don't think that's an accident. I think that is a deep part of evangelicalism. that we have not sufficiently taken seriously.
And I think it extends, we are talking a lot about like race or religion, but I've noticed that it extends beyond that, like how we use money or like steward our time or steward our money or our things. Like the fact that we have asylum seekers living with us seems really radical to people. And Mac and I are always like, that's just what Christians do. But other people are like, well, we can't simultaneously house and care for people and then pay for all of these things that we want. So we're just going to pay for the things that we want. And there's like, so I think that it extends beyond that. That individualism extends to, I want my comforts, I want this suburban house. And so instead of looking at what is the gospel, how does the gospel change me or how does the gospel change us, it's more like, how can the gospel bless what I have and bless my views and bless this, which I find interesting. I think it extends into whole personness.
Yeah, I think that this actually leads really well into one of the things that I had suggested talking about today about parenting and what it looks like to, well, parenting and Christian ed and kind of all of that. What does it look like for a family or for a church to begin that conversation that this is important and this is a part of the gospel, like from the beginning, as opposed to many of us who got it when we went to college or when we heard Tony Campolo speak or when we, and so what does it look like to talk about and live out a faith like what you're talking about, Robbie, with our families and our children in our churches in such a way that they begin from the beginning to understand faith in this way.
Yeah. And I mean, again, I think you're exactly right. I think this story illustrates that. I mean, this guy was young, right? And the faith that he received mainly from his child and teenage years.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it has to start young, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm curious, y'all all have kids who are being raised in churches and in Christian homes. What do you see are some of the maybe some of the holes or the pitfalls that you are just some of the biggest ones?
Oh, wow.
Well, I think for me, I'm not sure if I know. I mean, I think for any pastor's kid and probably for any child of anyone who is regularly attending their own church service, it's difficult to know what kind of a faith education your child is receiving because it happens elsewhere. And that's not I'm not advocating against having a separate children's or youth ministry. I think there's great value to that. But I do think that we're not very good at connecting that, and it is really difficult as someone who goes to church and then your family all splits up and goes their own separate ways, to really understand what's happening. And I think probably one thing that would really help in the church is to find ways to connect families. So one of the things that we did addressing this problem through the season of Lent was to do a family worship time on Wednesday nights where everyone was together in the sanctuary. We split off into our own separate rooms and Bible studies, but we had sort of a similar theme that we were covering. And then we sent home family dinner devotional guides. So the idea was you had a special meal around a table. Each meal had a symbolic act, a function, a sequence, some sort of a blessing or the lighting of a candle, something very specific that then kicked off a focused conversation on what you had talked about and what you learned about. Unfortunately, I think very few people in our church actually made use of that. But I think that those sorts of things are the kinds of things that pastors need to be thinking through to figure out how to connect our education of our children in with what we're doing with what we call big church.
I think as part of that, and this is not a pitfall, but maybe the opposite of this is a pitfall, is actively talking about your own faith and why you do what you do and the choices that you make and what that looks like, as opposed to hoping that your children pick it up somewhere. I think about, Robbie, I think that you were talking about money. And, you know, we choose to spend our money in particular ways because we're a Christian, because we're Christians. And so having that conversation on a regular basis, especially as I now have a teenager whose friends have all kinds of things that they want and get, she's like, why don't I have this? Or why don't I? And so it gives me the opportunity to talk about financial stewardship and the way that we give to the church in that conversation with teenagers, and there aren't questions that they asked or have asked as children or as teenagers that we're unwilling to talk about or to sit. Like if they're asking the question, we try to be willing to talk about it. I think it's a lot easier in a household like ours where we both have theological education and are able to talk about kind of trickier issues. I know that that's more challenging for parents who feel like they are not equipped to have those conversations because they don't have theological education. But I think just the openness to talking about questions and situations and our response as people of faith has been important for us in raising children in the church.
So, Heather, I think that's a really interesting comment that you make. And that's one of the things I remember when I was in youth ministry. I had a couple of parents who came to me expressing displeasure about certain behaviors their kids were doing, and they were blaming me. Right? They're like, "You're the youth pastor. Why is my kid who comes to youth group every week doing these things?" and that was when I was even less couth than I am now. And I straight up said, well, what are you doing about it? And they were like, excuse me? And I said, if your kid comes to every single thing that I do for them every week, I see them for 3 total hours a week. And I did the math at the time. And I was like, however many hours there are in a week, right? I get them for 3. I said, you have them for at least 30, like that you're actually engaged them, or have the potential to engage them. You have significantly more impact on your children than I do. I know they think I'm cooler than you because I'm not their parent, but as far as if you look at all the studies, like parents have by far the most influence on their kids, even when they're teenagers.
Right.
And so one of the things in my last church when I was in Ohio, and what we think about at Catalyst a lot is like, how can we equip parents to do exactly what you were talking about, knowing that they don't necessarily have a lot of theological education. Right. So like one of the things we do is my children's director, Vanessa, she gets my sermons ahead of time. And she does a kids version in our kids church of the sermon that I'm doing in the main gathering. And they use puppets and they do all. She's awesome. She does a great job. But what that means is that like when the parents pick their kids up, they can talk with them about what they learned in church. And the parents just learned obviously like a somewhat more sophisticated version of the same message. And so it gives the parents an ability to feel some level of comfort discussing with their kids what they learned in church and not just going like, oh, Jesus, huh? Sounds good. Like that's a small step. But having them all aligned that way, and again, part of that is because I have a fantastic children's director who can do that, But
JR, if you use the lectionary, there are resources that go along with the lectionary that are children's resources and adult resources. I'm just saying.
But does that necessarily mean that the sort of the message and the takeaway that I'm doing for that particular passage is going to be what in that resource, right?
Yes, you're right. You're right.
But that is a helpful tool. I know a lot of our listeners are lectionary preachers, so maybe they're not aware of those. Maybe we could put those in the links in the show notes at anotherthingscharity.com.
Yeah, I think that's those things are available that I think would be good. I think too, one of the things that parents are afraid of, and not just parents, I work with college students, and sometimes the conversation when we talk about trickier issues, or I think about things like sex, things like suicide, which are a little bit different than what we're talking about. But sex, suicide, drinking, if we talk about it, then they might have the idea to do it. And we're like, no, these are things that they're already thinking about. Like, you talking about it is not going to put an idea into someone's head. And sometimes I think that we're afraid of that. Like, if we talk about these big issues, how will our children receive it? And will they suddenly start thinking about things that we don't want them to be thinking about, or we think that they shouldn't? But knowing that generally they're already thinking about these things, and the fact that we haven't had conversations with them about them, we're already behind the 8 ball on it.
Yeah, I again, when I was a youth pastor, like we would do some of that kind of stuff. And I had parents who were like, I don't want my kids learning about this stuff at church. And I said, I mean, I hear you, but that means the only place they're learning about it is at the lunch table. And do you want their same age friends being the only voices telling them about these issues?
I taught a senior level class at Trevecca for 7 or 8 years. It was like the whatever senior level religion class that everybody takes. And we talked about sex in that class, just like a Christian response to sex or whatever. And I would always do an informal poll and say, how many of you have talked about this in your church or youth group? And always it was less than half, and sometimes only a quarter, ever had their communities of faith talk to them about sex, particularly, or money. Those were two things that their communities of faith really hadn't ever talked about.
Well, those are two very minor issues that never cause problems in our culture. So
we do intentionally intergenerational church at our church, so everybody's together. Like some of that is because we're small, and some of it is because it's a good protector against some abuse issues. Like we don't have to worry about screening childcare workers because we don't have childcare workers. But because of that, I used to censor and I still do. I'll still put trigger warnings sometimes on like certain sermons or things, or you might want to consider talking about this. But then I realized like even the kids in the room, like some of these things that are coming up in scripture are important for them to hear. And so now I don't, like, I'll just say, hey, you might want to follow up and have a conversation with your kids after service. And so, and it's never been an issue. Like they kind of just learn everybody's learning the same thing every week in the same space. So it's kind of interesting. We do a few different things with that, but it's fun and different, and yeah, it's an adventure.
So are there ways and practices that we can put into place as pastors besides the preaching moment that would help our families with this?
I just launched a young usher program at my church. So our kids really wanted to serve. They really wanted to serve communion, and I always let them. And then I realized I don't think they know what they're serving. And so I talked to the parents and was like, what do you think about doing a training with them? Like giving them a few different places to serve and educating them about what they're doing. And so we did a training and it was great. Like we walked through like, we never take communion. We always, and the kids would yell, receive. Why? Because it's a gift. Like all of these different things that we kind of walked through. And it was really helpful because a parent came up to me a couple weeks ago and said, it's been really powerful for me having the children serve me in church, because we always think of our kids as always taking and never having anything to contribute, but they have something to contribute to our faith. And I think it's helped all of my parents kind of rethink discipleship at home, where it's been much more collaborative and a lot more discussion based. Just like those are all things, like it's part of the Sunday church service, but it's all things that are a little different. That's kind of still changed the discipleship conversations in home quite a bit. From my kids aren't just empty-headed receivers, they're also contributors. So how can we change these conversations? And I think that was a really healthy move for us and for them as families.
That's excellent.
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense.
I think anytime you can get kids involved in serving, that goes a long way. And just make up things for them to do, right? If you have to assign an adult to help, that's okay. Like we have some of our teens serving in our production booth, and let's not pretend that teens aren't better at technology than adults.
It's so true. So true.
What kind of stuff do y'all do, Tara? I mean, you mentioned creating like setting aside a specific season to do some of that. What else have y'all tried?
Well, a big part, one of the things that I really appreciate about BFC is that when it comes time to service events, the various groups are very much involved. Maybe less so the children, but even they are there present, kind of running around. So when we're setting up for any kind of event, everybody is a part of it. When we're setting up for Sunday morning service, the teens are serving coffee and a part of setting up the tables and chairs outside. When we do communion, teens and children are there and present and able to help serve. So I think we do a really good job in the service aspect of involving everyone and bringing everyone together in that way. what I want to work on is being more intentional, not just with what we're doing there at the church, but with what we're sending home and equipping. Like I'm trying to imagine what it looks like to equip our families for their home life. So I keep thinking about what Heather said. I've got a theology degree and I still find it difficult to look for and create spaces to be able to talk to my kids about this stuff. I can't imagine what it's like for parents who don't even feel like they're equipped to be able to do so. So I want to develop practices that make it more possible for families at home to be able to have those conversations and create those moments. For me, the big question is, how do we open up space for the moments to occur? And so our season of Lent was kind of our first big experiment into that. And I think it was incredibly effective. I just don't think a lot of people did it because they maybe didn't understand it or didn't have the time. And that's going to be our next step to work on.
I will say one thing that I think, talking about how to open up those conversations, this is like super bougie cliche, but people always say, why do your kids care about all these things that they care about? How do you get them to talk about these things? And I say, we listen to NPR, which sounds dumb, but they're learning about all kinds of things around the world that are happening. They ask questions. They know what's going on. They were able to talk about, in an age appropriate way, when they hear a story about, we talk about war, we talk about issues of poverty, we talk about justice, we talk about how the church responds to these things, all because they heard a story on NPR. And sometimes there are definitely stories that I turn off. Like they'll start a story and I'll turn it off and the kids will be like, why'd you turn it off? I'm like, we're not talking about that now. But it's been really helpful to us as parents in helping to engage in some of these areas with our kids. It sounds super stupid and nerdy, but I found it really helpful.
I wonder, we have not tried this, but I just wonder if there would be some way of creating some kind of a family event I shouldn't say that. I hate it when people say family to mean people with kids, because people without kids are also families. Yes. But some kind of like kid friendly event where there was a part of it built in where like either the parents could ask the questions that their kids have asked that they're like, I don't know, or like the kids could even submit questions and like the pastors could lead some kind of a theological conversation.
Ooh, that's a great idea.
But it's like communal, right? Everyone's around tables and it's very, so, you can kind of either provide some structure or let them kind of talk around their tables first, or I don't know, like just something where you're getting people to communicate, but then you say like here, like it's like a stump the pastor kind of a thing.
I was just going to say stump the pastor kind of thing.
Yeah. I think that, I mean, I don't know. A lot of people love that kind of stuff anyway. And you kind of ask like, oh, could God make a rock so big he couldn't lift it? Right? But like, then you get more serious stuff too, I think. And especially for parents, I'm just trying to think of things for parents that really do feel like theologically inadequate. Like it might be a fun way to, and the other thing I hope it would do for if our pastors are leading this thing, that we would be humble enough to often say like, hey, that's a great question. I don't actually know. Or like, you know what, that's like one of the hardest questions in the history of the church. And here's a few different people and the way they've wrestled with it. But like, it's a really hard question. And I'm glad you're asking it,
I think too, as pastors, I talked about this on Sunday, but if we create a culture where it's okay to ask questions, even for adults, to ask questions of us and one another, I think that changes things for the kids that are growing up in that church too.
Yeah.
Like sometimes we're so focused on what do we need to do for kids that we forget that some of why they're nervous asking questions is because their parents are nervous asking questions, or they feel like it's not okay to doubt or question things. So if we can shift a culture where it's okay to have hard conversations, and we're kind of leading in that, where it's okay for the adults to do that, and the kids see it's my mom's asking questions, or my dad's asking questions, or so-and-so is asking questions in the church, it suddenly makes it more permissible for them, which I think creates a different culture in which then those parents that feel like, I don't know the answer, but let's go ask Pastor JR together or whatever. It creates a different culture, which I think is a good, healthy thing within a church.
I wonder too, if you could, I think it's related to that, but if you could, when things happen. So, we started today's episode about the synagogue shooting, like when that happens, I wonder if you as a pastor could write, a half-page email, like here's some questions that your kids might have. Here are some ways that you might talk about this. And so taking things that are happening that might be dinner table conversations for our families and giving parents resources, and they may not use it at that, or there's a death in your congregation, or a baby is born with disabilities, or, all these things that might be difficult to navigate and talk about, that you're on the front end of that and helping parents think about, here's some questions that folks might ask, and here are ways that you might be able to talk about it. I don't know.
No, I love that idea. I think that's a great idea. I mean, that requires being aware and present in the moment. And I know, we pastors hate that, but I think that's excellent.
I think too, they're like, as the ones who are leading and setting the example, we do need to have a graciousness towards receiving questions.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes, particularly if people ask difficult questions or questions that catch us off guard, we tend to react with like a defensiveness that discourages further questions, right? And sort of, I think if we can just be aware and treat it when people ask us questions as pastors, like treat that as a gift, as an opportunity to press deeper beyond what we're able to do in a sermon or a Bible study, and really address those more fully and more deeply. Then I think it can really begin to build that culture. So anyway, well, we are out of time for this episode. We would love to hear if you are doing some things that are really encouraging parents and helping them feel confident in discipling their children, or if you found some really good ideas, or maybe you had some good ideas while this was happening. You can reach out to us at our show notes at inallthingscharity.com, obviously our Facebook page, facebook.com/inallthingscharity, or on Twitter. You can find us all on there and use the hashtag inallthingscharity to continue this conversation. We'll be back next week with another great episode. But until then, thank you for listening. Thank you for engaging, and grace and peace be with you.